sorry about that. Real life intervenes every now and then in these things. So, in the computational pathology articles in early 2018, in the Pathologist, in the first of them, Nasir Rajput said the following things, which are once again very comforting, sort of like what we've just been talking about with GERD. So, AI pathology is never going to replace pathologists. Uptake of digital pathology for training purposes is much higher than in clinical practice routine diagnostics. Nobody should feel threatened by advances in digital and computational pathology. So, those are two very broad, definite statements that sort of say, don't worry about anything, right? And it seemed to me that it would be better for people to understand what the likely reality here is, rather than just telling them that it'll never happen, that there'll be no impact on the workforce in pathology, laboratory medicine, either its size or what it has to do, or what the focus of its activity is, and that artificial intelligence represents no threat at all. Now, if you think about just in general terms, if we talk about existential risk for human beings, like if there's some catastrophe in the next few years, it would be nuclear war, but beyond that, probably artificial intelligence is the biggest risk out there. And if you think of utopian outcomes, things that could make your life much better than you ever imagined it could possibly be, artificial intelligence also has the potential to do that. So to kind of tell people to just keep on doing what they're doing, don't worry about a thing, it does them a disservice, I think, in that it suggests that they're just not smart enough to understand the truth, so we're going to tell them something else. So we wondered when this began, and so it's quite interesting that in the Pathologist magazine, it began early on. The magazine itself began in October 2014, and in January 2015, there was an article that was mainly about sort of mobile computing and general things like that, and was written by somebody whose degree is in electrical engineering, not a medical person at all. And suddenly, sort of right in the midst of it all, there came to be these statements like, see if this doesn't grab you. The idea that we could replace medical personnel with gadgets and algorithms is dangerous and misleading one that goes against the fundamental and centuries-old philosophy of medicine, which is all about feeling empathy for the patient. And then later on it talks about we have to be very aware of the continued need for the human touch and so on. And that then begins to sound almost exactly like the article we talked about last time, 5 reasons why artificial intelligence won't replace physicians. And the interesting thing about this is there are never any supporting articles given for the assertion that AI can't do empathy, it can't be creative, it can't be comforting, it can't save a human being right in front of it by hands-on something. And the reason why there are there is any evidence given, and I think is that the evidence in the opposite direction is overwhelming. You know, there has been like quite a lot written about the potential for machine empathy and how that would work. There has been work on creativity generated by computers and machines, starting almost from the earliest point. The first AI conference, I think, was like in the late 50s or early 60s. And certainly around 1985, people were already showing computer-generated art that was pretty impressive. And like 17 years ago in 2001, I've described this many times, but I had this Aaron artificial intelligence screensaver, and one of the best speakers I've ever met in my life was mesmerized by the thing, looking at it, and said, "I don't think I can compete with that." And this was like 17 years ago. So doesn't it seem like a very dull approach to people to pretend that none of that's out there? That, that obviously computers can't do these things. These things are uniquely human. And it is actually a much more interesting conversation for people if they know what are some of the very many creative things that computers can do. So.
I find it interesting because of this idea that only humans can show empathy or have these emotions, whereas we know that a lot of how we deal with people in our daily lives is learned, like they're learned behaviors, and because they're learned, they can obviously also be learned by machines, and it's possible that the machines could also be better at picking up emotions and displaying emotions than we are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I had an interesting experience on the weekend. I felt that since I'm doing a lot of talking about fiction and the truth, that I would pick up some books about that kind of stuff. And it turns out that at the present time that there are like so many books being written about the truth. It seems like every month, every week, there's a new person announcing, including, I forget the name of this person, but the most famous reviewer of books in the New York Times quit her job as a reviewer, is now writing a book about the truth. And so it's odd the way in which you might say the zeitgeist, the prevailing feeling of the time seems to be changing. And I like to look upon it as how this could be something that is positive, that people could be more forward looking and think of how the world could be better for everyone. But let me first tell the audience out there what happened at our poster. So a lot of people came by to see our poster about the fictional worlds and had many engaged conversations. One was a bit different and deeper. So one person came by and said that he believed basically that humanity was doomed because we are lazy and can't tell the truth, and that human nature can't easily be changed. So when machines are smarter than we are, it naturally follows that we will not survive the encounter with them because they will recognize it's disadvantageous to keep humans around. And I was quite amazed at this. He also suggested that we maybe meet once a year and kind of debate this again and see if my more optimistic view had changed or if his more pessimistic view had changed. But that's not exactly what happened, because later on he wrote to me and said no, he didn't want to go public with this because, I mean, who would want to be known as the person who said that the human race is doomed because we're all sort of lying bastards, and lazy besides, and so on. But there still are things happening that are quite unusual. So the comic strip Pearls Before Swine had the idea recently that we are all screwed, yes. So this character says, well, doctor, I have this terrible sense of dread lately, like everything in the world is about to go very, very wrong. And the doctor says, true, we're all screwed. And he says some psychiatrists give helpful advice, and the psychiatrist says, okay, flee. Now that just may seem funny to you, and no one would actually think of fleeing, but then there is also the very disquieting article in Medium just a few days ago, Survival of the Richest. I don't know if you've seen this. It's a very disturbing article. I'm not saying you should read it because you'll enjoy reading it, but it's probably good for you to read it. Sort of like cod liver oil, it tastes bad, but it's good for you. So, Survival of the Richest. The wealthy are plotting to leave us behind, and this is the work of futurist author Douglas Rushkoff. He's written books. I knew of him before, and he was asked by a group of very rich men to describe how to survive the coming apocalypse. They didn't know exactly what kind of apocalypse, but they were pretty certain there was going to be some kind. And the idea of positing that we all might survive was not interesting to these people at all. That seemed impossible, uninteresting, a boring concept because it's just wrong. So the idea that most of humanity will perish in this coming apocalypse, but that a few might survive, was what really interested these very rich people who employed this person to come and advise them. One of their main concerns was what to do about keeping their private army on their side. So they figured that the rest of the human race wouldn't like very much the fact that they were planning to be the only people who would survive this coming apocalypse. So you have to have a private army to keep you apart from the rest of these people who are not very happy with you. And how to keep the army loyal. Well, Rushkoff suggested just treating those people in the army nice. And this idea didn't appeal at all. It was like, no, that'll never work. So they thought some sort of shock collar around the neck or something worse that would force your army to comply. I just don't think, I don't think anyone has to describe why that is not a good idea. It just seems like, but so this is a lengthy, detailed article, and it's very, very disturbing. So the idea is that they would be the only survivors of this coming apocalypse, and use their riches to go off somewhere and start a new human society. I think that would be the worst human society ever, generated by these guys. It's like you cannot imagine a worse way to start the human race over than having these guys started over. But that kind of thing has never happened before. I mean, there are always weirdos, right? Strange people predicting the end of the world, and no one paid much attention to them and so on. But, this is almost the opposite of that. These are very, very rich people, people who have made a lot of money and can afford these armies and all these other things. And they're trying to figure out how to. And so I guess what I'm trying to say here is that this general feeling of what it's like to be alive now seems to be changing a little bit. And maybe we can make that sense of change, turn it into something good. So I think that's really what we're trying to do. And if you think about the idea of being honest and empathetic, it's the easiest thing anyway. Continuing to create a fictional world just gets harder and harder because you have to, the lies you told before have to fit with the new lies, and people get to a certain point in this world and say, well, what's next? There doesn't seem to be anything else there. Whereas in the real world, there's always more, and you don't have to keep thinking up lies. You can just tell the truth. So it really is, I mean, if human beings are lazy, like that one guy said, it's the easiest thing is to tell the truth, including the truth about what is likely to happen with interaction between AI and human beings, and also to be empathetic, potentially, with the idea. I don't know if this will seem shocking to you, but the way the world is run now, it is possible that there could be a superior being smarter than us that could run the world a little bit better than the way it runs now. Does that seem like such an odd concept? And so there could be cooperation between human beings and AIs who perhaps could cure all those problems that we have not been able to fix. Pollution and global warming and all those things. And we could ultimately have a much better world than we have now, with less conflict and more joyous things occurring during the day, less pain, and I just think that's something to really try to shoot for. So if the zeitgeist is changing, let's make it change in a positive way. Does this make sense to you?
Yeah. It makes sense too. I don't really understand. I guess I understand the reasoning behind the fictional worlds, but I think it's in everyone's best interest to get rid of them and to, as you were saying, be more truthful and more empathetic. Because if we are trying to avoid that kind of world where, super intelligent machines think we're just not worth interacting with and things like that, it makes more sense to get rid of the fictional worlds that might bring about that kind of change in those machines.
Yeah, and you may wonder whether there's anything happening out there that is like quite positive, and I think there is one thing. Tim Berners-Lee, who invented the internet. When the 2016 election in the United States happened, he was devastated, and he realized that this thing he created had brought about something really quite adverse, and could possibly that could keep happening over and over. That he regarded the internet as something that should be completely democratic, and like everybody's data would be owned by themselves and used by themselves and so on. So he has come up with a new idea of a structure for the internet. It's called SOLID. It's not a word that's hard to remember. It makes sense. SOLID, SOLID. And so he's working on that quite hard, and he regrets very much the flaws that ended up being in the first internet that he created. So those of you who agree with the unnamed colleague who thought that the human race was doomed, I think things like his activity creating the new solid internet give us some hope that the world really could be better than the world we know of today. So anyway, that's our message for now, and thank you very much for listening. Sorry this is in 2 parts, but every now and then my medical life impacts on what we do here. Thanks very much.
Thank you.